Beautiful, beautiful afternoon on this Wednesday. Hope all of you are doing brilliantly and you're staying safe and your well-being is taken care of. Again, welcome to another episode of Rethink Culture. This series is made possible by Chief of Heart, a culture and diversity science company. I'm your host, Mille Duchon, founder and CEO of Chief of Heart. So today I will be dismantling abuse in conflicts. We are seeing an increased amount of abuse from rising conflicts of thoughts and beliefs and practices. We see it online, on social media, and in reality when real conversations are had. We see it in schools when power comes into play, professor versus student. We see it play out at the workplace as well. Conflicts come out when there are differing aims and methods, competing or disparaging goals, differences in philosophies and personalities, misunderstandings, frustration, stress, and burnout. Most of the time, conflicts become louder and louder, where abuse seems to become a common way to oppress others to gain and maintain power. Today, we will be dismantling abuse in conflicts and explore ways to humanize conflicts. I have a very special guest with me today. She is epic. She is the founder and CEO of The Black Sheep Survives. Without further ado, let me bring her on. Roxanna Safdia. Welcome, Roxanna.
Hi, Mila. Nice to be here. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
No, it's so great to have you. You know, Roxana, I connected with you back in 2017. Right now, I kind of like stalked you on Twitter because the work that you were doing on Twitter was just fantastic, fabulous, and it gave me hope. It gave me a sense of safety because of whatever I was going through in 2017. Right? And you spoke a lot about conflict, and you still do speak about conflict and overcoming conflict and breaking it down. And you give people hope, and you give people resources and tools to take their confidence back and to humanize. And I want to highlight this: humanize. And all your sessions, you focus on humanizing it and taking onus in discussing all of those. So it's such a pleasure. It's so humbling to have you on Rethink Culture. Thank you for being here.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, like Mila said, we know each other for quite some time and we connected and we've done a few things together. As always, I love, being part of our platform or speaking whenever it has to do with conflict, just because it's just one of those things that are misunderstood, especially when it comes to abuse too.
Right, especially. And you have a lot of expertise in breaking it down. I love watching your shows, especially on Instagram. it's just fantastic. So I want to go right into the discussion. So for viewers over there, if you're listening from YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever that you're tuning in from, please do say hello in the comments and ask any questions to Roxana as well during our session. So let's start, Roxana, as to what is conflict. So people can have a gauge as to identify, okay, this is conflict, because a lot of the times people don't realize that it is conflict. People think, oh, it's just the job. That is just how I must behave and I deserve that. No one deserves how to be treated. So let's start with what is conflict? Where can conflict occur?
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but I think it's just very important to break this down a little bit more. Conflict is basically it's like a huge fight. It's a huge disagreement that needs a third party usually to come in, either facilitate a conversation or mediate through the conflict, because everybody is stuck and nobody knows how to move forward. Now, I want to break it down a little bit further, because a fight is just a disagreement. It's a difference of opinion, but those two parties usually could work it out. They can come up with a great solution or set some sort of boundary or whatever it may be. But when you're reaching the conflict level, you need somebody else to come in. And that's why it's so important for people not to get stuck in their views, especially when it comes to conflict, because there has to be some sort of give and take, or there has to be some sort of collaboration on both ends to come up with a very creative solution. Usually in my opinion, a third party needs to come in and do that sort of work because they've tried already. That's why it escalated from a fight to a conflict.
I love how you mentioned that you need some kind of collaboration in order to find solutions, right? People often think that a solution during a conflict is only one person's way, and then the other person's needs are dismissed, right?
And I
Uh,
always
uh,
talk about this too because a lot of people get a lot of terms confused, sort of like you got to compromise. So we see the word compromise come up over and over and over again. The interesting thing about compromising is that both parties have to give something up. Nobody wins or loses. It's like the worst possible, well, not the worst, but it's like the second best. Everybody's giving up a little bit of something. Compromising is that you win today, tomorrow I'll win. Just because everybody's walking away with like less than a desirable answer or solution. What you really want to come to terms with is collaborating on some sort of effective solution. And collaborating, it's harder than it seems because it takes a lot of time to get to that collaboration stage with somebody that you're at odds with.
Right. No, I absolutely love how you put it, right? There's a difference between collaboration and compromise. And this is such a fantastic term to deep dive into. Oftentimes we hear this narrative, right, being used, this term, especially used, let's have a compromise in family setting. And I want to emphasize this on family setting because the leaders that we see in our society at the workplace or in schools are the leaders who come from home. How are they resolving conflicts at home, right? However that we are behaving at home, that kind of transfers a little bit into the workspace. So in the workspace, let's focus on workspace. We talk about conflicts at the workplace and we hear managers or leaders saying, oh, play nice. That is one narrative that I cannot stand. Playing nice, it's not about being kindness. It's not about really understanding the root cause. And playing nice is often related to compromise, right? You win today, and then tomorrow I will win. I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I think when somebody says play nice, they're actually trying to cut you all the way down. They're trying to police you. They're trying to take away your voice and your value because nice is just one of those things that, what's nice? What is nice? And everybody has a different opinion of what nice is. Nice is basically just laying down and just going along and being a people pleaser and all that stuff. If that's what it looks like in a work setting, you're not being valued. So I can see why it rubs you the wrong way because after several times of hearing play nice, it means what I have to bring to the table isn't valued. So you're devaluing people at the same time.
Right. No, I absolutely love it. And this is like the narrative that we need to eliminate or eradicate, right? Because it is part of the conflict where people don't even understand. But let's go to, I want to transition a little bit. So we spoke a little bit about why collaboration is so important as opposed to a compromise. And we spoke about, what is a conflict? Where can conflicts occur? I want to dig a little bit deeper into what are the different types of conflicts. You have been in this space for years, mediating and having expertise. So let's identify the different types of conflicts.
Yeah. I think it's important to also not only identify the conflict, but also break it down a little bit further. And I think this is where you're going with this, is to realize what is abusive. So now we're getting into a whole other different space because abuse is power and control over a person, people, a group of people, things, animals, things like that. So that's when you start seeing abusive behaviors really come into play. Like in the workspace, you're going to see somebody who has power and control over you, who naturally has power and control over them, either their managers or their bosses or whatever it may be, because they're giving the other person monetary value or like their paycheck, or maybe there is sort of like, you mentioned the carrot and the stick, sort of like, maybe I'll get an increase or some sort of promotion. And that's what happens often. They're holding something and keeping you stuck. Even though you're extremely displeased with the corporation or the company you're working for, they're just keeping you stuck by dangling the carrot. And they do this a lot. It's power and control. Once you feel like you can't express yourself in some sort of setting, usually think about abuse. That's the word abuse coming into play. Okay, do I not feel heard when I do verbalize something? Are they minimizing my struggle, or are they gaslighting me? Gaslight is a huge, huge thing. So also manipulating. Are they making me work overtime for free, essentially, because I'm a person of color? Or, all of this stuff needs to be taken into account. And I mean, we could talk about it on and on and on.
I love what you mentioned about the different formats, right? Manipulation, gaslighting, retaliation is a form of abuse as well in conflict. So I want to talk a little bit about manipulation, because oftentimes people, when they are in a situation of conflict, right? When they are in a conflict, oftentimes that you go into this myopic vision, as to you have tunnel vision as to, okay, I'm being in a really viscous situation. I'm not able to find solutions or resources to help myself. How can manipulation look like? And manipulation, how can that transfer into retaliation?
Yeah. So several things need to take place during the manipulation problem. Either the other person's not trying to take accountability for what the issue is, and it festers. And when that happens, there's different things that happen. Either they can go into, like, again, minimizing the conflict, pretending the conflict isn't there. And what happens is, when you don't address any of those things, the conflict grows and festers. And people start feeling like, I'm not valued or heard in this setting. So what do? They start getting resentful. And then they start learning how to do other things to compensate for the compensation that they're not getting. So sort of you see, like, people either stealing from work or pretending that they're working, but they're not really working, because it's just the nature. You're not being valued. And these things usually go unheard and unspoken about. It's just something that happens. And usually either somebody gets fired or whatever it is. But the initial issue is never resolved, because what do? They bring somebody else
in. You identified a great point in regards to resentment, right? Someone pretending to work because they're not valued, and that's ostracization. That's isolation in a certain form. When someone is not valued, to your point, your voice is not being heard. They are not being valued as an integral part of the team. When someone's voice is not included, it impacts on their emotional state. It impacts their mental state as well, right? And there's a correlation when someone loses purpose, or it's just like in a family, when when you feel like, oh, I'm not part of this family anymore, especially when I know this is, I'm like jumping, especially when two single parents, right, and they meet each other and they are combining family, right? Children often are caught in that conflict of the merging, the change, right? And they often feel like, okay, I'm no longer part of this. And there's a lot of disagreements coming about, and that results in a conflict. The disagreements, or you're not part of my family, you're not my sibling, that kind of conversation. So when that comes into place, there's resentment. And when resentment is present, the child, not in all cases, but disengages from family gatherings, right? They don't feel, they will just walk away in family picnics, and they will not come to dinner, and they will not do house chores, and they'll start hanging out with friends, hanging out at the friend's place.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of behavior is mirrored at the workplace too.
Yeah.
Not all time, but
when you see it in homes, it's very important, because home life is very different than work life, obviously.
Right.
When you see it in children, usually if there's some sort of conflict that's not being addressed, again, the resentment grows and they start acting out, becoming rebellious, doing things that they shouldn't do. Like I mentioned, if you're not being heard or valued, okay, because they're not really taking accountability for anything, you're gonna feel like not safe in that space. And safety is
Right.
a big thing for each and every one of us. I think that's the main thing that everybody should practice. When you're in a safe in any relationship, work, home, whatever, school, friends, relationships, like romantic relationships, what are you gonna do? You're gonna lose respect for the other person, and you're gonna start to act out. And you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
do things that you usually wouldn't do, or because you can't have that transparent conversation with somebody else, there is a roadblock. Every time you try to have that conversation, it depends. You get either like policed, or somebody comes in and says, no, you're not really having a real conflict, or just shut up about that, or whatever it may be. So there is this like roadblock. And it
Mm-hmm.
depends on what kind of mindset you have and what kind of mindset the other person has. Do you have a fixed mindset, or do you have a growth mindset?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people in power tend to have a fixed mindset because it values to them to devalue other people. No, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to hear about that. That's the end of it. Move on. Let it go. But it's important to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're not being heard, nothing could be resolved. And that's why it's
Right.
important to bring in a third party who is neutral to the conflict to help both of you have a conversation. It's important to also know who you're dealing with. Do they have a fixed mindset? Do they have a flexible mindset or a growth mindset where you could have conversations and ask questions?
Mm-hmm.
Asking questions is a big thing. Are they open-ended? Are they closed-ended? Like, how does that look like? And the response that you're getting.
Yeah, I absolutely love how you just broke that down. And you mentioned about safety, right? The psychological safety is such a huge piece
Mhm.
in it, for someone's purpose, for someone's belonging, for someone's value, right? When people feel that they are safe in a space, automatically their performance goes up. Automatically their productivity goes up. Performance and productivity in a sense where it's not about, okay, you hit all these numbers. Performance as in they become more creative. They become more have ownership in taking new projects and all of that, right?
Yeah, when you're
So
feeling understood and safe in any scenario, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I feel safe. I feel heard. They understand me. I'm not getting judgment. I'm not
mm-hmm.
getting criticized. I'm not getting put downs. So you automatically feel good about showing up wherever it is that you show up. And it's,
Right.
safety is a huge thing to talk about and a priority for anybody in any relationship that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I absolutely love that because you just said, and that's so important, right? And in any space that when someone's leading at the workplace, in schools, wherever, you are still showing up as a human, right? It's like it's like you go on top of a mountain to bungee jump, and you have that string, well, not the string, that rope, string your hair, but rope to kind of like secure yourself, right? But imagine if you don't have that rope securing you, right? And you jump and you know you're going to get hurt or die. But with that rope, you know that that's safety, the safety of your life, the safety of your well being. And yet you can experience whatever that you want to experience. So
That's a
I
great,
think,
great, great analogy. You see it like if you're gonna jump off, you have that fear. It could be that fear of having that conversation with somebody else, like you don't know
mm-hmm,
where the conversation's gonna go. You take a leap, right? And then finally, when you're free falling, you're just sort of like, oh, I don't know, maybe, maybe, maybe. And then finally, when they just give you the space so you could be yourself,
mm-hmm,
people who experience safety usually open up and reveal everything that has been holding them back because that's what they crave. Everybody craves
mm-hmm.
safety. If you don't have safety in a relationship, it's sort of like you mentioned, like bungee jumping without that cord. Uh, it's not going to turn out well. If you offer and give somebody else that safety, when they do reach that level, they automatically go, okay, it's not a bad conversation. It was a hard, difficult conversation,
Yeah,
but I'm glad we had it because now we could actually grow in our relationship. And you need to have this with every single person in your life. Every
yeah.
single person. It's not only for work.
I I love what you mentioned about fear, right? When you have that safety, the fear goes away. That's vulnerability. That's trust, right? And in the space of safety, um, in a space of like abuse, when abuse from conflicts are coming out, when you have safety, fear goes away, depression kind of goes away, confusion goes away, right? And oftentimes people don't think about this. Loss of sleep. How many times when you are in a conflict, especially abusive conflict, right? How
Mm,
many times do you toss at night, toss and turn? Your sleep cycles is affected, right? You can't fall asleep, or you wake up at 2 a.m. having anxiety, depression. And then another thing is that unexpected or unexplained change in behavior. To your point, Roxana, you mentioned about pretending to work or acting up or doing something else. That those are all unexpected, unexplained change of behavior, and also deprivation of liberty, right? Like the liberty is taken away, and sometimes people experience unexplained pain or illness.
mm-hmm.
It's these are all signs of when indicators when safety is not present and all different aspects of someone's well-being or being shows up in this form.
So I just like to expand on that a little bit because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't realize that their physical symptoms are actually connected to their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, if you're not sleeping and you're getting your sleep dysregulated, that is going to have major implications on how you're going to feel the next day. Even like
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2 nights of you not being able to sleep, you're going to feel it in your body. And there's this great book called The Body Keeps a Score. Usually, if anybody has read that, they know that the mind body connection is real and we need to really pay attention to what's going on because a lot of people environmentally, they might
Mm-hmm.
be okay at home, but then they go to work and they're in a toxic
Mm-hmm.
work situation. So how could you not carry that back into your house? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like a cycle that
Mm-hmm.
keeps going because you're not happy in one area of your life. It's just like if at work everything's going great, but you're having a really hard time at home, it's going to show up in your work. And eventually it's going to affect you physically, where a lot of people have like these crazy phantom pains of like, oh, my shoulder hurts, or like I'm getting a lot of jaw pain. I'm getting all these migraines. I throw up. I get like bubble guts. I get diarrhea. I throw up often. Every morning before I go to work, I throw up. This is normal for somebody who has a toxic work environment. And they sit
Mm-hmm.
in their car and they don't want to go into work. And they're
Right.
wondering why. A lot of people, I feel like in abusive relationships, they don't realize that they're in abusive relationships. And that's the key. A lot of people say, oh, if you're in a toxic relationship, leave. But it's not that simple. It's not
Mm-hmm.
simple to say, first of all, victims who are under any sort of abuse, they don't like to call themselves victims. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard for them to even open up and share that safety that, yeah, they believe that they've been abused. When you ask them questions, and it could be like easy follow-up questions like how do you feel before you encounter this person, or tell me a little bit about your situation, they start opening up and they start letting you know this is what my experience is. But I don't think that that's abuse. I just think we're in a fight. I think we're in an
Mm-hmm.
argument. And you're like, no, that's abusive behavior because they're not able to say that's abuse. Abuse is such a big word that it intimidates a lot of people. And I always like to tell people this isn't Hollywood, you know? Because a lot of people feel like abuse is like Hollywood, like, TV shows and movies. And it's like, no, this is real life. If somebody's gaslighting you on a daily basis, that's abuse.
So let's talk a little bit of gaslighting so our readers and listeners can get a grapple of what it means. What is gaslighting? How can that manifest?
Yeah, so gaslighting actually comes from a 1942 movie. It's called Gaslight. And in this movie, the husband was actually like hiding things from the wife and making her go crazy. So sort of like he'll like move a piece of jewelry that she knew was there, and then he'll be like, I don't know where it went. Because he was driving her crazy. He was actually making her doubt her reality. And a lot of people do this, and it's so common. It really is. It's more common than anybody thinks. It's sort of like right now, right? We're having a conversation, you and I, and I'll give you an example. Before we logged in, I texted you and I said, hey, are we still on? You could have been like, hey, Roxana, I sent you an email. How come you didn't get it? Huh? You sent me an email? And let's say that you didn't send me an email, but you're still like telling me I sent you an email. Go check your inbox. And I checked my inbox, nothing's there. That's a form of gaslighting because maybe you didn't want to take accountability for something. So it's like so common. People do this all the time to escape accountability. And that's what happens. They don't want to say, oh, I messed up. They don't want to take ownership of, whatever it has happened. And in order for you to grow in any relationship, you have to take ownership of something. And I feel like with victims, they take ownership so much to the point where they're a victim. Everything is placed on their shoulders because their abuser doesn't want to take accountability for anything. And I talk a lot about narcissistic abuse. And narcissistic abuse is a person who thinks that they're entitled to abuse you no matter what their label is. So a lot of people do this because they think, oh, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, I'm your sibling, I'm your boss. You have to do what I say. And it's like, no, it's not okay for you to gaslight me because you're my mom. It's not okay for you to gaslight me because you're my dad. And when you confront other people of like the discrepancy, usually they come back and they say, but this is my label. I'm your spouse. I'm your this, I'm your that.
It's interesting. Oh my God. It is so interesting when people use identity markers, right? Like stairs, I'm your mom, I'm your friend, I'm your manager, all those identity markers.
And we see also, like I was going to write about this, is gaslight on gaslight. And this is secondary trauma, secondary abuse by peers. And it actually is really hard because the victim knows that first you're going to be able to say, okay, I was abused. And then you're going to get criticized by your peers, anybody who's in your, safe circle. It depends on who it is. And, if you have a couple of toxic people in there, they're going to judge you anyways. Right. But secondary, you're going to have gaslight on top of gaslight. And people are really afraid of this because not only do they not have the space to like open up and heal because they don't have that safety, then they're going to get criticized by a third party. And that keeps people in abusive relationships. I think it's important to understand why people stay in abusive relationships. It's not easy to just leave.
Right. And that's a great point that you brought up, right? I want to touch a little bit on gaslighting. Let's bring it to the workspace. Workspace gaslighting women of color or people of color. This is such a common behavior, right? Even though there are research saying, a lot of organizations are recruiting people of color into the organizations, and yet only 4% will move up into leadership positions. The rest of them struggle. And from research, like speaking to quite a number of colored women, most women have shared that no matter what they try, it is not good enough. And like to your point in gaslighting, right? Like the managers would say, I sent this to you. Didn't you receive this document? Or moving the meetings, right? The meeting was supposed to be at 12 o'clock and then they move it to 11 a.m. or 1 p.m. And usually the case is earlier. So it looks as though the person missed the meeting. So the person will show up at 12 p.m. like, oh, where's the meeting? And then they'll say, oh, didn't you get the email? I sent you an email, right? Or didn't you get the memo? I told someone to tell you. And then all of them are in a click, right? So those are the things that goes on. Sorry, you were going to say something.
You're going to get into it in the workplace because it's a white supremacy space, right? So as a person of color, you're always going to feel devalued, either by another work friend, work peer, or a boss, or some sort of anybody. Because what happens is, let's say that as a person of color, you're open and transparent, you go to HR, you're supposed to like file a report on somebody who said something to you, right? You go to HR, you tell them, listen, I had an experience with Susie from accounting. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And Susie did this. What are they going to do? They're going to tell Susie from accounting, and she's going to say, well, she gave me attitude, or she talked to me like this. Meaning, I had to tone police her because I didn't like her delivery. I didn't like the way she was speaking to me. Therefore, I think that it's okay to abuse you. We see this so much, and we're seeing it on our spaces. We're seeing it on social media today. I saw it on social media today with the black and white challenge. Today it's happening. And a lot of people don't understand what certain things are because they can't break it down. Like, for example, everybody posting the BMO black squares. Everybody did it. Everybody fell for it in some capacity. Some people realized it, took it down. I was one of those people. I took it down and was like, no, this is not okay. Also decided to make follow-up posts of certain things that were important to me. But there were many, many women, especially white women, who were very upset that I said anything at all. They threw words like, you're being divisive by even continuing to speak about this. And my comeback to them was, it's not being divisive if we're highlighting and we're bringing awareness to a certain topic. We're being divisive by not speaking about it, and we're actually making you comfortable because you don't want to hear it. You don't want to change. You don't want to say, oh, I have a hand in this. And I'm not saying, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, you hate white people or whatever it may be. And it's like, no, I don't actually. You don't know that. We're just talking about something that is very sensitive to us. And why can't we talk about it? Why can't that's the thing that always gets me, like, why can't we talk about it? And then you get words like, yeah, you're being divisive, or, that's not really loving. And that's a way to gaslight the person who is talking about something that's important to them. You're policing their message because you don't like the message that they're saying to you. It's hitting you, it's triggering you. Instead of you sitting and doing the work of the trigger, you're projecting and becoming defensive over it. And a lot of people, in order to avoid accountability, what they do is they become defensive over whatever topic it is, instead of sitting there and absorbing it and say, ooh, okay, I could learn from this, or I've done this a time or two. Let me do better.
Right. I loved what you just mentioned, the narrative that you heard from women, especially white women, saying that you're being divisive. And division, right, from their lens, they're looking at as division, and they're saying that we need to have loving words and all of that. So this kind of behavior is coined as, I call it privilege bullying. When you come from a space of privilege, let it be if you are white female, white man, if you are male at the workplace, even within communities of minorities, right? There's colorism, and one group, ethnic group, sees themselves as dominant as the other, and they use their privilege. So I call this privilege bullying. And when we identify privilege bullying, people often come from a space of what is not comfortable for them. To your point, Roxanna, you mentioned about tone policing. That's the kind of behavior that we are seeing, saying that where ultimately people will take on this form of, I am being positive. I need to portray myself as being positive. I need to portray myself as I am helping. And I call it the kindergarten teacher form, because I've experienced it. I mean, nothing against kindergarten teachers, but how do kindergarten teachers treat 5-year-olds? Is that how old you are when you go to kindergarten? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they take on this. It's so and they do it everywhere. They tone police everywhere. I've been tone police like ever since I started, and it's because they don't want to hear it. They want to be like la 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 la. I only want to hear the information that's prevalent to me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The morning that you wake up and you want to write or you want to like educate people over like some particular subject, they might wake up that day and be like, I'm not trying to listen to
Right.
this today. But that's privilege. If you're not trying to listen to one specific subject
Right.
today because you don't feel like it, that's privilege, right? But people tone police victims all the time. What were they wearing? What were they doing? How were they
Mm.
walking? Were they with their, male friends? Like, why didn't they just say that they had a boyfriend? We don't have to do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the
Yeah.
bigger picture. Victims don't have to do any of that. They're always trying to like box people in. And this is what it looks like. People who like to tone police, they like to keep you in a box. Sort of like
Mm-hmm.
victims all look like this. All of them. All of them. And what you need to
Right.
realize is that victims are also outside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that they could be outspoken. They could be professional women. They could not realize that they've been in abusive relationships all their life. They could be really, really, they have an attitude. They have victims come in all sizes,
Right.
all genders.
Right. And I want to highlight a very important thing, right? You mentioned that, when you post something, people have a problem with it. And this conversation itself, to some people might be negative, might be difficult to assimilate, but we need to have these difficult conversations, honest conversations, where for some people, these are the reality, right? Roxana, you mentioned about, smear
Yeah.
campaigns. You mentioned about gaslighting. You mentioned about manipulation. And if you have experienced a privileged life all your life, right, you will not be exposed to this reality. You will not be exposed to this lens. Hence, it will come as a fake story to you. But the whole point is to dismantle all of these, dismantle, peel down all the layers, what is happening in order to understand, to take ownership to Roxana's point. How do we take ownership? So I want to explore resolutions right now. In order to find solutions, in order for a positive to come about, we have to acknowledge the negative and the currency, which we did. So let's move to the resolution. How can we
So
explore?
also one thing that is very important is a lot of people feel like, okay, an issue happened, issue. We're gonna address it. However it is that they address it, right? Solutions. So they do
Mm,
this little three-step thing. Issue, address, solution, right? Seems very
mhm.
simple. Here's the thing. If we're not addressing everything, including root causes in the issue part, everything else is bullshit.
Mm,
It really is, because there's people that are feeling unheard in this stage, okay? Now, I hear a lot of people who are like, well, if you talk about this stuff over and over again, how is that healing or productive, right? By you enabling somebody and letting them speak, letting them open up, creating that safety is actually incredibly healing and could actually bring very important solutions. Because when people are stuck in their anger stage, they're stuck in that unheard space.
mm.
They can't brainstorm. So a very important thing to move forward and bring resolutions is letting people have their say and open up so you can come up with very beautiful, creative solutions that nobody has even thought about.
I love that. I love what you just mentioned. That whole thing that you said. It's about humanizing, right? Humanizing, letting them have their say, having their voice being heard, and which many people do not even think of that. People think that just because we are in a conflict, I'm going to use my power to show who is in charge, right? And that itself eliminates inclusion.
Right?
That itself,
Fear creates fear.
right, right. Going back to the point that you mentioned about, when you create fear, it's no longer safe anymore. It's no longer a safety space for people to hold on to, like, okay, this is the rope, I'm going to go bungee jumping.
Yeah,
Right?
and that happens at any time. Sometimes in like in the mediation space or sort of like in a facilitation space, everybody feels like they're all moving along. Everybody is like, okay, we got all those deep, difficult conversations out. I got my story out. And then something happens where everybody takes a step back. And it's sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody gets very frustrated at this stage. And it's natural to get frustrated because you feel like, oh my gosh, we're going to bring all of that back. I thought we were doing so well. But that's because
Mm-hmm.
several people or a group of people, they didn't feel heard. They didn't feel safe.
Right.
Or they sat there and they were just sort of like, I don't know how many workshop spaces you've been on, but especially like workshops, and you're just like,
Right.
I'm just going to sit here and waste my time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're going to talk to me about inclusion. They're going to talk about diversity, but they're not really going to talk about it. And you're sitting there as a person of color. You're like, what a load of bullshit.
Right. Right.
What?
Right. Right. And this is how I want to use this as an example. This is how, okay, we often hear this narrative of the angry black person, the angry black woman, or the angry colored person, the angry brown person, the angry Asian person, whatever the narrative is. Have we ever taken the time to understand why did the person get angry to start with? What triggered them? How did they get to this space?
I think a lot of people are afraid of triggers, if you want me to be honest. They're afraid of people expressing themselves. And they see me talking with my hands, because I talk with my hands a lot, and being extra expressive. And if my voice goes to another level, they might feel intimidated. But here's a deeper thing to ponder. It's not what I'm saying. Like, it's not my expression, is what I'm saying. And a lot of people don't take the time to listen to what I'm saying. Listening actively will get you there. So with a lot of people, with a lot of my clients, they might have like literal reactions. They cry and they express themselves. I'm not afraid of reactions. So I feel like that's what makes me a really good coach, because I listen. And when I see a reaction, I'm like, yes. Automatically in my head, I'm like, yes, we can get to it. She feels safe enough to express herself, or he, to express themselves. They feel safe with me. To me, that's a huge yes. To a lot of people, that's a huge no, because they don't know how to deal with triggers.
Right. Wow, that's a lot to take in, but it's a good point to understand. So I know we're running out of time. So one tip for the next two things. What kind of tip would you give to people out there who are finding themselves in an abusive environment where there is conflict? How can they find sponsors, allies, and success partners to come out of that situation?
I think a really big thing, and I mentioned this today on my Instagram, is stop minimizing what you're enduring, because you're gaslighting yourself. A lot of people gaslight themselves. They're so used to gaslighting that they're like, they'll do it to themselves. Sort of like, oh, maybe I'm being too sensitive. So the next day they go to work and they're like, oh, I'm being too sensitive. Like, let me chill. Let me not, But I think a big thing is stop minimizing what you're going through. It's affecting you on a subconscious level, obviously. Start paying attention around you. See how people react. See how you're expressing yourself. If you're expressing yourself and you feel yourself getting like agitated, resentful, why? Start asking yourself deeper questions. Why? If you feel stuck and you can't figure it out, talk to somebody. Start doing some research on your own. Reach out to somebody who is an expert in this stuff, because that's the best thing you could do. You could start opening doors and sort of validating your own story. And you don't have to gaslight yourself afterwards to fit in an abusive relationship. You can never fit in an abusive relationship. You're sort of stuck in survival anyways. And that causes people to act not like themselves. So a lot of people, their personalities change over time. And they feel like, oh, it's because, I'm going through something and it's really hard. Yeah, you're going through something. You're going through an abusive situation. And that's why your personality has changed. A lot of people outside of that relationship, they begin to blossom and do really well and go back to being the person that they used to be. To sort of like pay attention.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That's a very great tip, Roxanna. And to wrap our discussion up, how can each of us become socially responsible to humanize conflict? If we see something, people say, "Oh, we see something, say something," but
Mhm.
not just saying something, but how can we do something to humanize that space?
Oh gosh, see, that's a tough one. It's hard, like in real life, to walk around and say, "Oof," or I'm gonna jump in. I don't know what to do. I think it has to do with your tolerance level, also, because a lot of people feel like I don't know what to do. They can make matters worse, honestly. If it's somebody that you know and is having a conflict, it could be as easy as I don't have enough information. Please don't discuss this with me. Like, I don't want to get involved. Set a boundary. Setting boundaries is extremely important, and I think you should set boundaries with every single person in your life, because that's how you're going to get to know yourself, your capacity, and other people's capacity. If you can't set a boundary in any relationship, you're dealing with an abusive situation.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I love what you mentioned about boundaries, and boundaries are such an imperative factor to even keep our own sanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
If someone is asking you, okay, no, you will take notes today, no questions asked, I'm your boss. No, you will do this today, no questions asked. I think you need to set boundaries, saying, nope, I'm a team member. I want to be active, engaged in this discussion. We can record this meeting,
It's really
right?
tough. Yeah, there has to
Yeah.
be a level of assertiveness that you have to be okay with doing. You can't just go from like a people pleaser to all of a sudden be assertive. Because
Yeah.
they're gonna be like, you know what I mean? But again, practice makes perfect. So you continue to
Right.
practice with your safe people. It's important to figure out who's your safe person. And then one day in real life, especially at work, you'll be able to have these types of conversations where
Right.
they're like, no, 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 I only have an hour for you. No, 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 I have 2 hours to do this. Don't ask me for
Right.
anything else.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, these are great tips, not just to dismantle abuse and conflicts, but to humanize the spaces and to set boundaries. We are out of time for today's discussion. It was such a pleasure having you, Roxanne. And folks, remember, in order to create a healthy, diverse culture, we have to deep dive into real issues that are present but often treated as though they are invisible. Conflicts are treated as though they are invisible. They are swept underneath the carpet, right? And we should not be treating it invisible. Culture isn't only about ping pong tables and free tidbits or free dinner or happy hour, free booze, whatever you have. It is about creating a psychological safe space for all of the people to thrive in with equity, where diversity, humanity becomes integrated asset. Hardship is what we practice. When we lead with empathy, compassion, love, and kindness, we will truly understand how people want to be accepted, thus creating an evolving culture. Humanizing conflicts and breaking down conflicts is such an important practice, not just in our workspaces, but in our life. You can find Roxana on Twitter, the Black Ship Survives. You can find her on Instagram, the Black Ship Survives. She does awesome, epic live discussions on Instagram with various guests. You can follow her on LinkedIn, but predominantly you are active on Instagram. So follow her over there. And, if you want to find resources in how to tackle your own struggles, how to put your own boundaries, and how to approach conflict, she is your expert. Thank you again, Roxanne, for being here. That's all the time we have, beautiful hearts. Join me again this Friday, where I will be dismantling discrimination within the LGBTQ community. Have a fantastic Friday. See you all again.